Hi and welcome to this week's Retvlog, a series I basically started to make sure that every week there was at least one Retribution Paladin video, and well, we're getting quite a few at the moment because it's been another fairly big week for Ret Paladins for the Battle for Azeroth. Again, you know, Legion stuff seems to be grinding to a bit of a halt, really. We know there's still stuff surely to come out in Legion, but we just don't know what yet. But presumably from a class point of view, there's nothing really to come apart from the pre-expansion patch. So back onto BFA, and two things to talk about really, as before I go over some more things about the talents and where we are with it, because we've had another alpha build with another small change to Ret Paladin stuff. So earlier in the week, we had one of the class developers, in particular, the class developer who at the moment is puzzling over some Ret stuff, come onto the Paladin Discord and chat to everyone for about an hour on stuff, which was really productive. But I've already done a video about that. That was earlier in the week, so go and check that out. And secondly, Wowhead are doing a bit of a series where they're getting various people to talk about certain classes and the current state of things in BFA. Little bit weird because with some classes and specs they've had quite a lot of work done to them already. For example, Rets. Some other ones not so much. That presumably will come later. But it was our turn. You know, Wowhead asked myself and a number of other Rets to write a piece on it. They actually said we had to keep it to 1.5 pages. By the time I'd finished writing out my piece, 6 pages long. So I basically just slashed loads of stuff out of it. I just had to, like, you know, pick the few. We were talking to each other as well in Discord, the various Ret Paladins who'd been asked to contribute to this. There's quite a few of us, actually. There's myself, there's Solsacra, there's Max, Rebdol, Skeletor, at least. So there's quite a few of us who are going to be writing these things. I don't know when it's going to appear on Wowhead. We were asked to get it to them by sort of yesterday. And but I focused on, like, Retribution Passive was always going to go in there for me. I've definitely put that in. My displeasure at the Unbreakable Spirit talent, I don't like that at all. I know one thing to talk about, Rebdol's main gripe is, now coming on to talents here, so there's particular combinations of talents that work really well together. This in a way is quite good, because I quite like the idea that certain combinations will work together, because it also means you're much less likely to have a situation where, like now, we can just basically use the same talents for everything. So the three in particular that work well here are Execution Sentence, Wake of Ashes, and Crusade. Now, just a little note about some of those individually. People are a little bit worried about, oh, you're bound to have to take this or you're bound to have to take that. There is no talent you're definitely going to have to take at the moment. Obviously, tuning, even though I'm going to talk a little bit about it, I've said before, I don't want to get too head up on that. Obviously, every time something changes about a particular spec, then the tuning is going to get thrown out as well anyway. So, although you don't want to let tuning get too far away, you want to do at least a rough job of it. There's no point in fine-tuning, getting everything just right, just yet. It doesn't really matter. Like, for example, our AoE is not where it needs to be just yet, but that's fine, because they've said what our AoE should be able to do, and that sounds fine to me, and you know, that's what will happen. But at the moment, Crusade and Inquisition, in terms of the way they're simming, are both pretty much neck and neck. They're very close together. But they are significantly ahead of Divine Purpose. So Inquisition was nerfed slightly in this build, and it's still, you know, I mean, it was really powerful. But yeah, Crusade and Inquisition are both very, very powerful. You'd think maybe they need scaling back a little bit. Whereas the top row, Zeal, which is the new thing, Righteous Verdict and Execution Sentence are a little bit lower down. They're simming not very, they don't add very much at all. But with Execution Sentence, Wake of Ashes and Crusade, so they work well together for the following reason. First of all, Execution Sentence is going to be the one that people use the most poorly. Like, when we're looking at the moment, and this is what I'm envisaging for BFA. So, people posting their logs, first thing I do, I've said this before, is I look at the start. Someone, in fact, was doing it in Discord today. The first thing I ever do is look at their opener. What are they doing with Crusade? Because that is the most common source of error. You know, for example, using Crusade and not spending straight away after it. So with Crusade, of course, you want to be spending very, very quickly to build up those stacks more quickly. Avenging Wrath has had its duration increased to 25 seconds, or the last build actually, but that equally applies to this build. Oh no, was it this build? But anyway, at the moment it's 25 seconds in BFA. So that means Crusade itself has got a little bit stronger as a result of it. Now, Execution Sentence basically is a debuff. It does damage, but and it does slightly more than Templar's Verdict. But obviously, if all it did was the damage, it wouldn't really be worth it. It's all about the debuff. It's just that rather than make it just a debuff, Blizzard have made sure it does damage as well. I suspect, although I don't know this, but it wouldn't surprise me, shall we say, that's because of the hard time Inquisition gets from some people. And it's worth bearing in mind. I know people are going to reiterate it down here. It's Marmite. Inquisition is Marmite. People either love it or hate it. You know, and there's people who have strong views either way. There are some people who would like it to be baseline. There are some people who don't even want it to be a talent. And I think just to stop Execution Sentence being the same, because it could be a similar thing. Inquisition is a buff, Execution Sentence is a debuff, but it both increases the damage of your stuff. So they just make it do damage, so people at least feel like they're doing damage. I think where Inquisition mostly suffers from, it's not maintaining it. Anyone who says maintaining it would... What? It doesn't take anything to maintain it. It's simple. You know, you don't have to build up to a certain number of holy power to maintain it. You know, you can use a small number of holy power. It's so easy. But Execution Sentence, you know, that uses the 3 ones. Does its damage. So people feel, okay, I'm using holy power to do damage, and I'm going to get the debuff as well. But that debuff only lasts for a certain amount of time. And during that debuff, you want to ram as many spenders as you can, because people talked in Legion about the Judgment being like Colossus Smash, and it was in one way, but in another way it's nothing like Colossus Smash. The way in which it's nothing like Colossus Smash, I know there's a talent for arms that sort of monkey about with it, but basically you can't have it up all the time with Colossus Smash in baseline form, whereas you can with the Judgment. We never, on a single target, that is, swapping ads, obviously it's a different thing, but single target fight, we never have to worry about the fact that we're using spenders when we haven't got the Judgment debuff available. It's always going to be available when we need to use a spender. Not so with Execution Sentence, and there's nothing we can do about that because it's on a fixed cooldown and a fixed duration. It's not affected by haste. So that means that you have to plan, really. When you use your Execution Sentence, you need to be able to spend as often as you can during it. So a bad time to use it, for example, would be you've just used Builders. They're now on cooldown. You've got 3 holy power. Use it on Execution Sentence. Now what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You've got no Builders. You're still waiting for them to come off cooldown. You haven't got any holy power, so you can't spend anything. You're a bit stuck. Wake of Ashes is ideal for this. Wake of Ashes gives you instantly 5 holy power. So you can use 3 holy power and Execution Sentence. Wake of Ashes, you've got another spender there. All you need now is a Crusader Strike, and you've got another spender. Blade of Justice might come off cooldown now, another Crusader Strike. Or a Judgment. Remember, Judgment builds as well now. Crusader, you know, spend again. You can get several, and that's without Divine Purpose. Divine Purpose, you might get lucky on this as well. But that's without, you know, a lot there. And Wake of Ashes, of course, works really well with Crusade, so all 3 of those can work really well together. But here's the thing. The Wake of Ashes cooldown, and this is what Rebdal was, you know, I think saying in her piece that she's going to be contributing, it doesn't really fit around it. An Execution Sentence 30-second cooldown, Crusade 2-minute cooldown, so every 4th one you can have it during Crusade. That all sounds fine. Wake of Ashes 45 seconds cooldown. Now, depending on how tuning goes, we may be in a situation where we delay certain things. Like we delay Execution Sentence for when we've got Wake of Ashes available. Maybe. Or maybe we don't. And if we don't, then they're constantly going to be in and out of sync. More out of sync than in it as well. Because it'd be like, you know, execute all at the start, Execution Sentence, then you can use your Wake of Ashes straight away. Second Execution Sentence, Wake of Ashes not available. You know... So it's when the next Wake of Ashes is available, then the next Execution Sentence is available. So it's like, you know, in, out of sync, and so on. Which is going to be awkward, and it's going to be one of those things where it's going to be an advanced part of the guide if I have to do that and I produce a guide on that. But is that a bad thing? And this is where I want to get people's view. Is that a bad thing? Because another really interesting thing that this guy was saying, which a number of other people sort of went, yeah, of course. I'd never thought about it, I have to say. I've never thought about it. And that is that talents on the left-hand side are all deliberately made to be easy to use. You know, they might be passive, or they might, you know, even if they're not really active on use abilities, they're not like a new ability. You're not supposed to get a new ability on these left-hand talents. But I mean, this is for BFA, that is. You know, they might be active in a way, in the, but it's easy to use is the key thing. So if we just go down here, Zeal is entirely passive. I still haven't talked about that, I recognise, but I am going to talk about this video. Fires of Justice is entirely passive. Fist of Justice, okay, it helps to have some awareness of what it does, but again, it's passive in a way. Divine Vengeance is passive. Again, it's good to have an awareness of what it can do, but it's passive. Cavalier, all right, but it's giving you an extra charge of movement. So again, you need to know you've got it, but it doesn't give you an extra button or anything. Selfless Healer, again, you need to know that you use. It's not like one of these things where you can just take that talent and forget about it. You need to be aware that actually, yeah, when you build up your 3 stacks, you've got an instant cast Flash of Light, but it's not. You're not having to do anything special as such. And Divine Purpose, same thing, passive, that just gives you these procs. Again, some awareness of what that means is good. Like, for example, on a Divine Purpose proc, if you take Justicar's Vengeance as well, for damage purposes, absolutely use your Justicar's Vengeance on Divine Purpose procs, because Justicar's Vengeance does more damage than Templar's Verdict. Not enough to justify the 5 Holy Power, but with the Divine Purpose proc, it's all free. So they're nice and simple to use. Conversely, the other ones can be more challenging. So the fact that Execution Sentence and Wake of Ashes are on the right-hand side, to have them as not straightforward to use together, is that a big problem? Some would argue no. We're okay. I think what we need of any spec or class, possibly my view anyway, is it's this idea that it should be accessible to everyone, but there should be the possibility for someone who wants to think more deeply about their play to be able to get more out of it. And I'd be in support of that. I'd be absolutely in support of that. Because you've got to bear in mind as well, that level 15 row is quite interesting because it's all single target. Zeal, so I'll come to the Zeal now. So for those who don't know yet, it replaced Greater Judgment. I'm a bit disappointed in that. I liked the Greater Judgment. All right, and we were talking last week about, you know, maybe it could be more interesting, but just in itself, I quite liked it. So what the new Zeal does now is when you judge, you know, you get 3 auto attacks that go faster. Basically, you'll do a few extra or faster white swings of your weapon, so it's a bit more damage. Entirely passive. You don't really have to do anything about it as such. Righteous Verdict. That's like your Whisper of the Nathrazim effect. Only that's been nerfed from a 6-second window to a 5-second window now, which makes it not. It gives you only a very slightly larger window than for the actual Legendary Cloak. Now, given that these 3 talents, in terms of how they're simming, is on the low side, I'm a bit surprised about that. I'm not quite sure why they've done that. But again, it's one of these things. It's just, you know, I think with tuning at this stage, it's just a case of monkeying about with dials as if it ever gets any different. And they'll just see how it goes. So I'm not too worried about that as such. And then Execution Centers, also really it's single target. You know, none of these have any benefit to us in AoE. So as a result of that, the fact that you've got an easy one to use and a couple of more difficult ones to use, they seem to increase in difficulty. I'm okay with that because they're for the same thing. It's not like you've got on the same row, you know, one ability that's only any use in one thing. So if we come to the level 60 ones, for example, Divine Vengeance is an AoE talent. Consecration, which I'm also going to talk about, is an AoE talent. Wake of Ashes is suitable for both because the prime benefit of Wake of Ashes, it does do a fair amount of damage and that's really useful. But it generates 5 Holy Power, which of course is just as good for using on Templar's Verdict as it is for using on Divine Storm. So in a single target encounter, you would think you want to use Wake of Ashes. That being said, Consecration is not simming too badly either. But you would think generally you'd want to use Wake of Ashes. So if Wake of Ashes was very difficult to use, that would be more awkward because you'll be thinking, well, this is the obvious one to use on single target, and it's awkward to use. Not good. But I don't think that is the case. Now, coming to Consecration, this developer did say that they were umming and ahhing between Consecration and Divine Hammers. Now, here's another question for you, for the comments below. So he's plumped for Consecration. Now, here is my view on it. I would prefer Divine Hammers because I think that's better for the following reason. At the moment, what we would do in an AoE situation is we would be using as our builders Fires of Justice, Blade of Wrath, Wake of Ashes when it's available. Okay, sure, if you had Consecration, you can use that as well. Bearing in mind, with this Consecration, though, it's not up all the time. The cooldown is not equal to the duration. The cooldown is longer than the duration, so you can't have it up for as long. But it only generates one Holy Power. Okay, but it generates Holy Power. And then you've got Judgment, of course, which generates it. I would much prefer to be in a situation where I'm using an AoE, a proper AoE builder and AoE spenders. So Divine Hammers is a proper AoE builder. You know, 2 Holy Power. It replaces Blade of Justice, and it does its spinny hammers things, just like it did when we were using it sort of in Nighthold. I mean, it's been quite a good talent at times in Legion. It's only been tuning that's really been the problem. There was a bit of an issue where there was one point in Nighthold where, or a lot of Nighthold, where you just took it for everything, because although it was a slight, and I mean very slight, lower DPS on single target, pure single target, if there were any adds at all during the fight, you would still take it. So, you know, on a pure single target fight, okay, sure, you would take Blade of Wrath. But, you know, if there were any adds going to be appearing at all of any importance on the fight, even for a brief portion of the fight, you would take Divine Hammers, because why not? Why not? And then, you know, and it's been at times where then it's at the moment where it's not really worth taking it unless you've got loads of adds all the time. So tuning has been a bit of an issue there. But if they bring it, you know, if they brought it back, if they did choose between Divine Hammers as opposed to Consecration. So what are the pros and cons? So Divine Hammers for me, it's a Holy Power builder. It's replacing our Blade of Justice with something that's just passively doing AoE around us. We're constantly going to be doing AoE that moves with us. Consecration, remember, doesn't move with us. Now, I was talking about this in the stream last night, and some people were saying, well, you know, they could make Consecration move around with us. We had a glyph that used to be able to do that. Here's my thing with Consecration. I think, on the one hand, if I were that game developer, basically, I think I'd have made the same decision. Pick Consecration. Not because I think it's better. I don't think it's better. I think it's worse. But it's because it's popular. There's a lot of people like the idea of Consecration. Iconic Paladin ability. It is an iconic Paladin ability. There is no question about that. But is it right for Retribution? I remember when I quit the game early Wrath, and I came back towards the end of Cataclysm. When I came back, I thought Ret was a mess. You know, and Consecration was the biggest mess of all. Why have we got this bloody thing still and people trying to use it? Because before, you know, even though we had Consecration like TBC and stuff like that, you didn't really use it very much, and the reason for that is because mana was precious. It was a waste of mana in a lot of situations to use Consecration. But then in Cataclysm, mana was less of an issue because we had a very high rate of mana return. So you could use it, but fitting it all into the rotation was a nightmare. Like, when would you do it? Is it worth it? Do you use it on cooldown? Well, no. If you've got higher priority things, you don't want to do it. Trying to work out, you know, when you can afford to fit it in. There's no need for it. There's no need for it. It doesn't really add anything. In terms of it following you around as well, I don't know. There could be an argument that the idea of consecrating some ground means, well, that... I mean, you can make an argument for it following you around, but you could also make an argument for you've consecrated that ground, you've used that ability to consecrate that ground. If you move out of it, well, you're no longer casting it. You cast it before. The spell has been cast. It's not channeled. So why should it follow you around? There is that argument. You know, if we're going to get into the nitty-gritty class fantasy cobblers. But as divine hammers just make sense. You're conjuring divine hammers around you and you just move through everything. So that feels better. Replacing Blade of Justice with it as well feels better. Again, because if you're using, even if you're using Consecration, you're still using Blade of Justice, which is a single target ability, Crusader Strike, which is a single target ability, Judgment, which is a single target ability, to generate the Holy Power, which you're going to use to fire off a Divine Storm. You're using 3 single target abilities in an AoE situation. I mean, my original idea was seals, so we switched to one, we have seals and our abilities work as they do, basically single target. Then we switch to a different seal and all of a sudden they have cleaving potential. So they do less damage to a primary target, but splash damage, that sort of thing. So in other words, our abilities change depending on what seal we're in. I quite like that idea. That's obviously not going to happen. And a big reason we know that, they wouldn't even change to that system is the other interesting thing that was said, there's loads of interesting things said, that there is not going to be any 2-target cleave. 3 specs are going to get good 2-target cleave. Nobody else is, and we're not one of the 3 specs. The 3 specs are Destruction Warlock, Arms Warrior, and Frost Mage. They are going to have good 2-target cleave. Nobody else. Now, people have asked about, what about other Warlocks and stuff like that, and Shadow Priests with their dotting. I think, the idea with that would be, remember, when Warlocks and Shadow Priests dots, and I suppose Boomkins as well, multiple targets, they're not always doing it for AoE damage. Sometimes they're doing it to generate resources for their primary target. This is why, by the way, just as a little aside, when you're raid leader, let's say you've got a boss and you're trying to DPS the boss, and you've got some ads spawning, but they're not very high priority, and your raid leader says not to AoE the ads, they're not doing it because they just want you to focus more on the boss, although that is true. You're actually screwing over other people because, remember, some classes get resources from having dots on as many ads as possible because it actually generates them resources that they can use on their primary target. So you're screwing over your Shadow Priests and your Boomkins potentially and your other specs of Warlock. So I think that's all that is, but those specs that are not supposed to be 2-target specialists, they might well dot the other target, but just so that they can do more damage against the primary target. So it might be that their overall damage increases with 2 targets, but they're not really 2-target cleaving. Those 2 ads are not really going down at anything like the same sort of rate, is what I think is the important distinction there. But our 2-target cleave non-existent. Now, our 3-target, they said that all of the specs will then enter their AoE at 3+ targets. That's not really happening in a great way at the moment, especially if you have a talent like Righteous Verdicts that you're not going to be using Divine Storm on 3 targets at all. Even 4 is a bit iffy. Even 4, you might get a slight benefit from it. It's nothing great. So it's quite clear that our AoE needs boosting a little bit. And again, Divine Hammers would help do that in a way that Consecration I don't think really would. But yeah, it's one of these things. I think if they did it, there would be a bit of an outcry. There's a lot of people that, for some reason, just want Consecration on Rets. I mean, for me, even in vanilla, it was still a tanking ability then. When it was baseline, it wasn't a talent, it was baseline. Everyone had it. But it was still, I remember when did I use Consecration? Did I use it? Because I tanked, healed, and DPS'd in vanilla. You were just jack of all trades. Didn't main tank, of course, that'd be stupid. Although I did do on some easy bosses, but not on progress, that'd be foolish. But Consecration, when I think to what I used it for, I used it in Molten Core before the first boss, Luciferon, on the imps, because you sent in the Paladins to basically gather up the imps, get aggro on all the imps, and then other people would AoE them down. We weren't AoEing them down with Consecration. We were just getting aggro on them. And then after the first boss, just before the second, straight away after the first boss, on the Core Hounds, again, you sent Paladins, or we sent Paladins in with Consecration to gather them up around a single point. So again, people could efficiently AoE them all down. Because those Core Hound ads, the groups of them, had to all die at the same time. Otherwise, they just kept regenerating. So in a situation where we were basically tanking stuff, because we were very good at AoE tanking stuff, that's what I used it for. I didn't use it for damage. I used it for AoE. So it was always for that. So now that we have a much, you know, in the modern form of World of Warcraft, a much more rigid distinction between our DPS, tanking and healing spec, I don't mind losing Consecration at all if we're going to get something better out of it. I mean, what we've got at the moment is we have, thankfully at the moment, a situation where we've got 21 talents, all of which could be useful in different situations. So we don't have any, you know, obviously dead talents. But that doesn't mean to say that some of them couldn't be improved. So if I just go through the list now. So Zeal, starting back at Zeal. As it stands at the moment, it's a bit, yeah, I don't really like it. I much preferred Greater Judgment. There is a suggestion, because it was mentioned during this discussion, and the developers seem to think, there is a suggestion that maybe if it didn't just improve those auto attacks, which is just white damage, physical damage, that doesn't, our attacks don't proc anything. There's no interaction with that. So anything to do, because there was a buff we had early in Legion Alpha that basically boosted our attack speed. No one cares about attack speed because that's just white damage. That's why we never liked that. We never really bothered with that ring from Court of Stars, you know, auto attack damage. Don't do much auto attack damage. But if it did holy damage and was buffed by mastery, all of a sudden that's more interesting. So that's a possibility. I'll be honest though, I would rather it just reverted back to Greater Judgment. And if Greater Judgment wasn't doing enough damage, then, I mean, remember, it was 60%, knock it back down to 50%. You know, that's an easy one to tune as well. So, yeah, I preferred the Greater Judgment. It was very good for solo stuff as well, because you go around, you first hit on a mob, you know, Judgment, you could actually do a lot of damage to it because it's auto crit. I thought it was fantastic. And in terms of the other two, Righteous Verdict is not one of those that I particularly like to do, but I think it's fine as it is. I think it's okay. Execution Centres, I really like the concept of that, so I'm good with that. Fires of Justice, I struggle to see it as anything other than something to use if you think there's a lot of downtime in your rotation. Maybe you've got low haste, or maybe you're just not happy, because occasionally, you know, even with higher haste, there's going to be little periods of downtime. Maybe you just don't like those. You want to take Fires of Justice. I don't really see it as being something that I'm going to advise. If I'm thinking ahead to, you know, doing my first Essentials guide for the Battle for Azeroth, and by the way, I say first Essentials guide, I really genuinely hope I only have to do one. I hope they don't make too many significant changes through the expansion. But if they do, it'll be the first one. I'm not sure I'd see myself advocating its use in many situations. But it has use in some situations. Blade of Wrath. Do I want Blade of Wrath to stay? Can I think of something better? That's an interesting question. Blade of Wrath, in terms of how it works, is absolutely fine. You know, there is. I don't think anyone has a big deal with how Blade of Wrath works. It's pretty good. It means that you give Blade of Justice a higher priority to use, just as we do now. It works well for single target and AoE because it generates extra holy power, and that's the key thing about it. But maybe there is something that could be done, like a different talent. But then, you know, at the moment, I'd look at it and think that's fine. Hammer of Wrath. Now, this was the other interesting thing. So, Hammer of Wrath, what he said, he asked the question, and he said, would you rather it just worked as it does now, or that it was a pure execute, in other words, doesn't work during Avenging Wrath, unless it's also during an execute, but does more damage? I favour the second. I would rather it was just an execute, and did more damage. Now, the reason I'm smiling is because it was taken away from us in Legion, and the reason it was taken away from us in Legion was because Blizzard said, oh, it's an execute. Warriors get execute, you shouldn't have it. And I remember saying at the time, we'll remove the execute quality then. Because although it started off as an execute in vanilla when it first came in the game, it's, you know, by that time, by Warlords of Draenor, it was something that you used more often during Avenging Wrath. It was just something, it was an ability that appeared during Avenging Wrath or during the execute phase. And I said, well, remove the execute portion then. Have it as an ability that only works during Avenging Wrath. I'd be fine with that. But, you know, that didn't get any traction. So that's why I'm smiling now. So we're going from a position where I said, look, if you've got a problem with it being an execute, remove the execute component and just keep the Avenging Wrath component. Now we're moving into a situation where they obviously don't care about the fact it's an execute and they're actually willing to make it a pure execute. Remove the Avenging Wrath portion. But that apparently is an actual choice, you know. We could well see in a future build, maybe the next one, maybe not, because obviously until a decision is made, they're not going to change anything in there. We're going to actually potentially see it as a pure execute that does a lot of damage. I'd be perfectly happy about that. I'd be fine with that. Because there are some fights, I mean Argus, which was what we're progressing on at the moment, where the last phase is really, really crucial. To have an execute in that phase is massive. In fact, I worry about the fact that at the moment we're not really using a warrior on it, on that fight. And I'm thinking, well, you know, it's all about the last phase. And it doesn't get any easier as you go into that last phase. And there are fights like that, where actually the rest of the fight is relatively pedestrian. You just have to complete it as quickly as possible to give yourself as much time as possible in the last phase. But the last phase is when it all goes, you know, chaotic, and you want to get that over and done with as soon as possible. Mistress Azim was another classic one, wasn't it? On to the next row. Fist of Justice, Prepared Blind. I don't really care for those because I'm mostly a raider. You know, crowd control for me is just, I would just take Fist of Justice almost all the time, unless there was a specific scenario in which I was sort of told, you know what, in this particular thing we're going to be doing, you probably should take Repentance or Blind. I mean, if I was going to say anything about this row, I would say that Repentance should be able to work on any sort of, anything that anything similar would work on, you know. So if anyone has a long-term stun that can be used on things, then I think Repentance should as well, because I think it's a bit old-fashioned, this notion it only works on certain types of humanoid mob. Because there's, like, for example, I can't use this on the ads on Agrimar. Doesn't work. What? Why? Why doesn't it work on them? So yeah, I would say Repentance should probably work on more things. If something can be stunned, it should probably be subject to Repentance. On to the next one. Divine Vengeance I would absolutely get rid of. Not because I think it's a bad talent, I just think it's a boring talent. And also, when it refunds your holy power for you, you very frequently won't be able to make instant use of it, because you don't want to be delaying waiting to see if you've got the refunded holy power. You'll have to assume you don't. So I would replace it with, now, two ideas that came up were, one, my preferred one, which is Final Verdict. So not Final Verdict as we have in Legion, as we had in WoD. Now, WoD Final Verdicts gave 3 effects, but it's only one that I'm interested in. And that is that a use of Templar's Verdict doubles the damage done by your next Divine Storm. So that means in an AoE situation, what you do is you do Templar's Verdict, Divine Storm. Templar's Verdict, Divine Storm. And it doesn't matter how many mobs there are. That's the beauty of this talent. You don't have to try. I remember, you know how you see sometimes you'll see non-Ret players trying to do a guide on Rets or some video on Rets, and they were talking about, oh, on so many, you need so many targets for this to work. The beauty of it was that was absolute codswallop. It works on any number of mobs. This would work on. Now the downside is that potentially would even include 2 mobs, and they don't want us to have 2-target cleave. That might be one thing that scuppers it. Now he didn't say that at the time. He sounded as if he was reasonably interested. I strongly suspect we won't get it just because of that. We might, because if Divine Storm is going to be usable on 3+ targets, then obviously this would allow it to be used on 2+ targets. For that reason, we may not get that, which is a terrible shame, but we may have to accept that. The alternative was Divine Tempest. Divine Tempest, of course, is something that a lot of people quite like, and we'll be very sorry to lose. I mean, they could even just make that baseline, but I don't think they will. So having it as a talent, yeah, that might have possibilities. My only concern with having it as a talent is there'll be some times when you don't get any benefit out of it. It's very difficult to predict when you will. Because in a situation where ads are not being grouped up very efficiently, then obviously Divine Tempest shines. But then what, say, you know, you do a run and the tank actually does gather the stuff up really well. Well, then you're not getting any benefit from it. And you've wasted it. And you could have had Consecration at the moment or Wake of Ashes, which were far better. So maybe Divine Tempest would struggle to compete. Unless it also did something else. Consecration I've already talked about. I mean, I would prefer it was Divine Hammers. But I do think at the same time there would be an outcry. And I am a big one for thinking about what the community at large wants. I just see Consecration. I mean, it's not that it's going to struggle damage-wise. Like the way it's simming at the moment, it's not at all going to struggle. But it's that situation of, you know, you're moving ads out. If it's not going to follow us around, and I think there's no reason for it to follow us around, although it'd be nice. From a gameplay point of view, it'd be nice. It'd just be easy with Divine Hammers. But I've already gone over that anyway. Wake of Ashes, I think, is fine. I would prefer it were on a 30-second cooldown like it is in live. I mean, the damage it does could always be nerfed. Obviously, the key thing is the 5 Holy Power. Obviously, we don't want it to generate less Holy Power and just to be on a shorter cooldown, because that defeats the point. Unless we say it generates 4 Holy Power to reduce it down to 30. I mean, it's not proportional, but, you know. I would much rather it was on a 30-second run. Maybe it's deliberate, though. Maybe they don't want it to work too well with Execution Centers. If you have a situation where you can use Execution Centers, and then you can always use Wake of Ashes immediately after it, maybe that makes Execution Centers too easy to use. Maybe it makes that combination too powerful, and so, therefore, freezes out other talents. Maybe that's the issue with it. And maybe that's why it's got to be 45 seconds. I don't know, but I would prefer that with 30. Cavalier, I would like to see replaced with Long Arm of the Law. Long Arm of the Law, very, very popular. I would like that as well. Where, for those who don't know, it's a talent that used to exist, where when you use Judgment, you get a bit of a speed boost for just a few seconds, 3 seconds. And it's not as much of a speed boost as Divine Steed. I think it was used to be like something like 45% speed boost. Something like that. Nice little speed boost. The idea being you can Divine Steed away from something, and then you could judge your way back to it when you've run out of whatever it was. That would be better than just having 2 charges of Divine Steed. You know, having Divine Steed baseline as it is now. I mean, all right, we're not happy about the 1-minute cooldown, but you know. But Long Arm of the Law, yeah, that would be good. They have, bear in mind, I mean, last time I talked about Judgment, I did mention that they've reduced the cooldown of it compared to Legion. They've bunged it back up, but that wasn't this. That was last build when I noticed that. So you're not going to be able to use it as often as we could, because the last time we had this, well, I remember in Mop in particular, when I remember it really useful on Garalon, which is a boss in Mop, because I could use it to move from leg to leg. And Judgment was on a shorter cooldown then, so you could use it quite a lot. And but I would replace Cavalier with Long Arm of the Law. Unbreakable Spirit I don't like. I've gone through that in the post that will at some point appear on Wowhead. But I don't like it because I don't think it reduces the cooldown enough. I think Divine Shield has too long a base cooldown. And if you're going to keep it at 5 minutes, for whatever reason, I don't think it's worthy of that, then the Unbreakable Spirit talent at least should knock it down to, say, 50%. But if it doesn't, I would rather they just got rid of the talent and replaced it with something better. You know, like Blessing of Spell Warding. Now, here's the thing. Some people will suggest that Blessing of Spell Warding, in the form that Protection Paladins have it, is too powerful. Because it's one thing to be able to put a Blessing of Protection on another raid member, because that hardly ever comes in useful. Hardly ever. Very little fatal damage is physical in a raid. There's usually a handful of times when it is good in an expansion. I don't think it's ever useless in an expansion, but it's only ever good on like 3 or 4 fights. I mean, what have we had? We've had, I'm going to have to try and remember them now, bugger. So, I mean, in Antorus, we've had a couple of uses. You can use it on Iminar to allow, like, a Demon Hunter or someone, like we use it on Demon Hunter, to break through all the bonds on, like, the 2nd and the 4th bridge. So you put a Blessing of Protection on them for that. You can use it to stay in or let someone else stay in during Eradication on the first boss, Gorothi Worldbreaker. Got an inkling there's something else in Antorus as well. And then on, but if we go back to while I think about that, Tomb of Sargeras, Mistress Sazine had a couple of good uses. One, the Hydra Shot was physical damage. So if you didn't think there was anyone in your beam, you could use Bop on yourself or someone else if you saw someone else alone. You could also use it on someone to get rid of their Murloc. So let's say someone had a Murloc eat in their face, but they needed to grab the fish buff. You could use it on them to get the Murloc to drop off. So, you know, it was useful for that. So that's at least 3 fights where it's been useful. I've got an inkling there was 1 or 2 others as well. But there's at least 3 fights there where it was useful. Whereas a very similar buff that does magical damage would be way better. Because almost all fatal damage is magical in nature. So, you know, people have said it would be guaranteed raid spot if you actually had Blessing of Spell Warding. So maybe we just have a variation on it. It might be one that only works on ourselves, or it might be one that instead of an immunity gives a damage reduction. You know, I'd be okay with that too. Obviously on a way short cut. Because I don't understand as well. Like, I don't think Divine Shield can justify a 5-minute cooldown. But I especially don't think Blessing of Protection does. But anyway, you know. But that's what I would do with Unbreakable Spirit. Either replace it with something like Blessing of Spell Warding, or something, you know, a version that would be more suitable for Rets, or just boost it to 50% off, or just reduce the baseline cooldown of Divine Shield, and then 30% reduction might actually be okay. But as it is at the moment, I'm not saying I would never use it, because if I look at it and I think to myself, okay, well, this is a fight where I know I'm not going to have to move around a lot, so there's no point in taking Cavalier. Or Long Arm of the Law, if indeed that becomes a talent to replace it. And I don't want to use Eye for an Eye, because again, there isn't a lot of physical damage going on. So Eye for an Eye is only going to be useful on physical, where there is a significant amount or a dangerous amount of physical damage going on. So in those situations, well, I might as well use Unbreakable Spirit, because why? I know I'm not going to use the other 2 abilities, so why not? It might come in useful. But yeah, I don't like it. Eye for an Eye I'm fine with as it is. It's fine. You know, physical damage reduction is fine. A magical damage reduction would be better. So a Divine Protection would be better. So, you know, if I could choose between having Eye for an Eye or a similar ability, even without the counterattacks, because that's, you know, that's no good to me in a raid anyway. But one that gave a magical damage reduction on the same sort of deal, I would take the magical damage reduction immediately. Immediately. So that's what I would like. What I'd especially like is something that just did straight up damage reduction. Magical stroke physical. That would be better too. Okay? So Eye for an Eye is fine for what it is, but for what it is not going to be used on very many fights. On to the next one, Selfless Healer. It's a popular talent, and for that reason, I would tune it and then leave it in. I'm personally not a massive fan of it. I think it's better than Judgment of Light, because we didn't really get much use out of that, or indeed any. It's not one of my favourites, though. But that being said, given that this is a healing row, can I think of anything better that they would do, by the way, that they would actually do? No, I can't really. So just keep that one in. Justicar's Vengeance I like. Word of Glory is better now. That is better. I'd still prefer it if Word of Glory was either didn't cost resources or didn't have the 1-minute recharge time. You know, for me, having both of them means that I am much less likely to want to take it, because it's a DPS loss, which is fine, but also not even one that you can, like, if you get into a really tight spot, you can maybe use it a couple of times. Bear in mind you've got to build up your holy power to use it at all, and then you can't use it at all. So it's not like anything you can use to sustain any sort of help that you can give. On to the last row, I think they're all fine. Obviously, tuning aside, at the moment, Crusade and Inquisition are just too far ahead of Divine Purpose. They need reining in. But in terms of the way they work, they're all absolutely fine. I am a big Inquisition fan. You know, I think generally I'd prefer to use Inquisition over Crusade. Obviously, it's one of those things where I will use whatever is likely to be the best on a particular fight. But Inquisition, you know, I quite like Inquisition. Divine Purpose I really like for solo stuff as well. That's really good. The fact that you can use Justicar's Vengeance on the procs and do extra damage. And for solo purposes also means you get more healing as well. And if you've got a stun available, all to the better, because it'll do even more then. So that's pretty good as well. So most of it's pretty good. But yeah, there's a few things I would change. And those are the sort of things I would change about them. So anyway, let me know what your thoughts are below. I'm going to be, of course, every time they change anything there, when I'm streaming, I'm going to be streaming, for example, in a couple of hours. From the point of view of recording this anyway. When I am streaming, I'm going to be doing... I'm going to be on my Warrior, I think, later. Or I might do Warlock. I might go on the Warlock for a bit. But I do Ret stuff as well every now and then. Whenever they change anything, the next stream I always do is always on my Retribution Paladin. So, you know, find out when I'm going to be doing things like that. But even when I'm on a different character, I'm always fine to talk about the Ret Paladin, of course. Those are the questions that are going to mostly come my way. Thanks very much for watching. As I say, put your comments down below. Don't forget to give it a like before you leave as well. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share it with anyone else that might be interested. And until next time, I'll see you later.